I stopped being a co-owner on a Tuesday. The house smelled like rosemary and lemon. I had roasted chicken that afternoon, the way Daniel liked it, with potatoes that crisped at the edges. The kitchen was clean. The invoice software hummed on my laptop at the dining table. Outside, the streetlights blinked on in sequence, the way they always did at 6:47. I was wearing the cardigan he'd bought me in Portland, soft gray wool with buttons that caught the light. Everything was as it should have been, except the email in my inbox had a subject line that made no sound when I read it, but somehow I heard it anyway. Shareholder update, effective immediately. This isn't fiction. This is how partnerships disappear, one legal document at a time. We built the company in our second year of marriage. Not from ambition, really, but from necessity dressed up as a dream. Daniel had been laid off from the engineering firm where he'd worked since college. Budget cuts, they said, though everyone knew it was because he'd questioned a senior partner's numbers in a client meeting. He came home that Friday afternoon pale and quiet, his cardboard box of desk items sitting in the trunk of his car for 3 days before he finally brought it inside. I had just left a job where my boss called me sweetheart in meetings and never my name, where my ideas were repeated by men 10 minutes later to applause I'd never receive. I was 29 and tired of being decorative. We sat at the same dining table one January night, laptops open, wine glasses leaving rings on the wood, and sketched out what would become Strata Solutions. Daniel drew diagrams on napkins, system architectures, client workflows, revenue projections that felt absurdly optimistic. I built the spreadsheet that turned his diagrams into something a bank might believe in. It was supposed to be ours. The articles of incorporation listed us as equal partners, 50-50. I remember the day we signed them at a notary public in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. The notary was an older woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She looked at us over her lenses and said, "You two married?" "Yes," Daniel said. "Good. Makes it simpler if things go well. Messier if they don't." She stamped the documents anyway, her expression suggesting she'd seen both outcomes too many times to care which way we'd land. I handled operations from the beginning, invoicing, client communication, hiring, the insurance paperwork that made Daniel's eyes glaze over. He managed the technical side, wrote proposals, coded prototypes, stayed up until 3 a.m., solving problems I didn't understand, but trusted him to fix. We divided the work the way you divide a life, naturally, without resentment, because it was ours to divide. Some nights we worked until 2 a.m, both of us hunched over laptops at opposite ends of the couch, our feet touching in the middle. Other nights we closed the laptops early and made love on that same couch, like we were still 23, still surprised by each other, still certain that wanting something badly enough was the same as deserving it. The first year, we made $17,000, barely enough to cover rent and ramen and the anxiety that woke us both at 4 a.m., wondering if we'd made a catastrophic mistake. The second year, $62,000, enough to exhale. By year 5, we had 12 employees and an office with frosted glass doors and a reception area that made me feel, briefly, like someone who had earned the right to be taken seriously. Daniel always introduced me the same way at networking events. "This is Maya, my wife and business partner. I'd be lost without her." He said it with his hand on my lower back, warm and solid, his thumb making small circles through the fabric of my dress. I believed him because I had no reason not to, because the evidence of our partnership was everywhere, in every contract I negotiated, every hire I made, every crisis I managed, while he focused on the work that made us money. I didn't know then that belief is just the space between truth and evidence. I didn't know that the hand on my back could guide and push away in the same gesture. The first hairline crack appeared in March, nearly 8 months before the email. We were in the office late, just the two of us, the way it used to be in the early days. Most of the staff had gone home by 6. The office had that hollow quality it gets after hours, when the fluorescent lights hum louder and your voice carries too far. I was reviewing vendor contracts at my desk, a mug of tea going cold beside my keyboard, when Daniel's phone buzzed. Once, then again, then a third time in quick succession. He glanced at it, his expression flickering, something between recognition and annoyance, then swiped something away and set it face down on his desk. "Everything okay?" I asked, not looking up from my screen. "Yeah, just Garrett." Garrett was our attorney, also Daniel's college roommate, which meant their communication often blurred the line between professional and personal. They texted about football scores and legal filings with equal frequency. Still, 3 messages at 9:30 on a Thursday felt odd. What's he need? Oh, just some paperwork, corporate housekeeping stuff. I'll handle it. The phrase corporate housekeeping settled in my chest like a stone I couldn't name yet. Something about the way he said it, casual, dismissive, final. Do I need to sign anything? No, it's just structural stuff, boring compliance things. You know how Garrett gets about documentation. Don't worry about it. I nodded, went back to my screen, but my fingers hovered over the keyboard a moment too long, and I noticed, for the first time maybe, or maybe I just allowed myself to notice, how quickly he'd answered, how smooth the deflection had been, how he hadn't asked if I wanted to know more, just told me not to worry. That night, Daniel came to bed smelling like the office. Coffee and dry erase markers and the faint electronic heat of too many devices running at once. He kissed my shoulder, murmured something about being tired, about an early meeting. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the furnace click on and off, watching shadows from the street shift across the walls, wondering why corporate housekeeping felt like a door closing somewhere I couldn't see. After that night, I started noticing the small things. Daniel began taking calls in his car. Not every call, just certain ones. He'd glance at the screen, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly, and say, "I should take this," and walk out to the driveway, even when it was raining. Through the kitchen window, I'd watch him pace beside the Honda, one hand gesturing, his mouth moving in sentences I couldn't hear. Sometimes these calls lasted 5 minutes, sometimes 20. He always came back inside looking purposeful, like someone who'd just made a decision he was confident about. When I asked who it was, he'd say Garrett or a client or just putting out fires, never defensively, just factually, the way you state the weather. As if the question itself was unnecessary. Passwords changed, not dramatically. I only noticed because I tried to log into our shared business account one afternoon to check a deposit and my credentials didn't work. The system gave me that sterile message. Invalid username or password. Please try again. I tried again. Same message. I felt a small spike of panic, the kind that comes when something you've always been able to do suddenly becomes impossible. When I mentioned it to Daniel that evening, he looked genuinely surprised. Oh, weird. I updated some security settings last week. You know, after that phishing email we got, Garrett suggested tightening things up. You changed my password without telling me? I changed everyone's passwords. It was a whole security audit thing. I meant to send you the new one. Let me reset it for you right now. He did. Within an hour, I had a new temporary password texted to my phone. But the fact remained. He had changed it without telling me. Our account. The one we opened together at the credit union on Halstead. The banker congratulating us on our partnership like it was a marriage. Which in a way it was. By summer, there were more calls, more closed doors, meetings I wasn't invited to, just Daniel and Garrett, sometimes with Marcus from our board, whose name I only knew because it appeared on quarterly reports. Marcus had invested early, owned 15%, showed up twice a year to rubber stamp decisions and collect dividends. I'd met him maybe 4 times in 6 years. You don't need to be there, Daniel said when I asked about one of these meetings. It's just financials and tax strategy. Super dry stuff. Marcus wants to talk about depreciation schedules and LLC structures. You'd be bored out of your mind. I had a business degree. I had built our financial projections from scratch. I was our operations lead. But I nodded and let him go because questioning your husband feels like admitting doubt, and doubt feels like the beginning of something you're not ready to name. There was a routine we had, every morning for years. Daniel would make coffee. Terrible coffee, too strong and slightly bitter. But I drank it anyway because he made it. We'd sit at the kitchen island for 20 minutes before the day started, talking about nothing important. Client gossip, weekend plans, the neighbors' loud renovations, small, ordinary things that stitched a marriage together. That routine ended sometime in July. He started making coffee only for himself, leaving earlier, saying he wanted to beat traffic or get a head start on emails. I'd come downstairs to an empty kitchen, the coffee maker still warm, but nothing left in the pot. I started making my own. It tasted better, which somehow made it worse. There was a mug in the office that I'd bought him our first year. White ceramic with world's okayest co-founder printed in block letters. a joke gift, something I'd found at a street fair. He used it every morning, filling it with that terrible coffee, leaving ring stains on his desk. Then one day in August, it was gone, replaced with a sleek silver tumbler, unbranded and expensive looking. "Where's your mug?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, it broke, knocked it off the desk." But there were no shards in the trash, no mention of it again. Just the silver tumbler, pristine and impersonal, sitting where the joke used to be. Small things. All of them explainable, none of them proof, but together they formed a picture I didn't want to see yet. I told myself I was imagining it, that stress was making me paranoid, that every long-term couple goes through phases where they drift slightly, where work consumes more than it should, where intimacy becomes something you schedule instead of something that just happens. I told myself a lot of things that summer. None of them were true. The email arrived at 6:52 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. I was alone. Daniel had texted an hour earlier saying he'd be late. Client dinner, something important with a potential investor. He'd grab food on the way back. I'd already eaten, standing at the counter with the plate in my hand, chewing without tasting, the chicken cooling too fast. I opened my laptop to finish an expense report. Routine work, mindless. The kind of thing I could do half awake. That's when I saw it. The subject line was bureaucratic, sterile. Shareholder update, effective immediately, sent from Garrett's firm email, CC'd to Daniel and Marcus. Not CC'd to me. I was in the to field as if I were a recipient of news rather than a participant in decisions. I clicked it open. The email was brief, professional, devastating. Dear Maya, pair the attached documentation. Please be advised that the ownership structure of Strata Solutions LLC has been reorganized effective September 15th, 2024. Your shares have been transferred into the Strata Family Trust, with Daniel Ortiz serving as trustee. This restructuring has been executed in accordance with the operating agreement provisions regarding asset protection and estate planning. All relevant documentation is attached for your records. Please contact our office if you have questions regarding the implementation of this structure. Best regards, Garrett Chen, Escrow. I read it 3 times before my hands started shaking. The language was technical, dense with legalese, but the meaning was plain enough. The company's ownership structure had been reorganized. My shares, the 50% I had held since we incorporated, the stake that made us equal partners, had been transferred into a trust controlled by Daniel. The effective date was 6 weeks prior. 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, I had not been a co-owner of the company I built. I had been operating on borrowed authority, a fiction of partnership that existed only because no one had told me otherwise. I opened the attachments with fingers that felt disconnected from my body. Legal documents, pages and pages of them, trust agreements, shareholder resolutions, amended operating agreements. Daniel's signature appeared on every page, looping, confident, unbothered. Next to his signature, Marcus's cramped scrawl. And next to that, Garrett's notary stamp. My signature appeared nowhere. There was a paragraph explaining fiduciary responsibility, another about asset protection strategies, a third about tax optimization and estate planning benefits, language about unified control structures and streamlined governance. Nowhere did it explain why I hadn't been told. Nowhere did it ask for my consent. I sat very still. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked forward. 6:58, 6:59, 7:00. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and stopped. The streetlights buzzed. My cardigan felt too tight suddenly, the wool scratching against my neck, the buttons pressing into my sternum like small accusations. I thought about calling him, demanding an explanation right then, over the phone, before he could prepare his defense. But my fingers wouldn't move toward my phone. Instead, I kept scrolling through the documents, reading passages that made my stomach turn. The trustee shall have sole discretion over all matters relating to the trust assets, including but not limited to sale, transfer, voting rights, dividend distribution. The beneficiary acknowledges that the trustee's decisions are final and binding. I was listed as a beneficiary, not an owner, not a partner, a beneficiary like a child in their parents' will. There was a section titled Rationale for Restructuring that made it sound so reasonable, so prudent, protecting assets from potential litigation, ensuring business continuity in case of divorce or death, creating tax efficiencies, all sensible reasons if you ignored the fact that they fundamentally erased my agency. At the bottom of one document, I found a clause that made everything clear. In the event of dissolution of marriage, the trust assets shall remain under the sole control of the trustee and shall not be subject to division of marital property. He hadn't just taken the company. He'd made sure that even if our marriage ended, I couldn't fight for it back. He came home at 10:40. I heard his keys in the bowl by the door, the soft thud of his jacket hitting the chair. He walked into the kitchen where I was still sitting, laptop open, the light from the screen casting shadows I hadn't bothered to turn away from. The coffee I'd made hours ago sat untouched, a film forming on the surface. "Hey," he said, his voice carrying that end-of-day exhaustion. "Sorry I'm late. Dinner ran long. You know how these investor guys are. Want to talk through every scenario." He opened the fridge, pulled out a beer, twisted the cap. "You eat already?" I did. He leaned against the counter, took a sip, smiled at me the way he always did, tired but affectionate, the smile of someone who assumes he's coming home to safety, to someone who doesn't know yet. "What are you working on?" I turned the laptop toward him. He froze. Not dramatically, not like in movies where someone drops their glass and it shatters. Just a stillness that spread from his hand to his shoulders to his face, a stillness that looked like recognition. The beer bottle hovered halfway to his mouth, then lowered slowly, carefully, back to the counter. "Maya, when were you going to tell me?" His jaw tightened. A muscle jumped near his temple. He set the beer down as if the surface might shatter, though it was only granite, solid and cold. "I was going to, it's complicated." "You took my half of the company." "I didn't take it. It's still yours. Legally, it's in a trust you control, Daniel. I don't have a vote anymore. I don't have access. I have nothing." "That's not true. You're still listed as an officer. You still have your role. Nothing about your job changes." "My job?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "I don't have a job there. I'm a co-founder. I'm an owner, or I was." He exhaled through his nose, looked at the ceiling as if the right words might be written there, then back at me. When he spoke, his voice was measured. Too measured. The kind of calm that comes from preparation, from having rehearsed this conversation in his head. "Garrett advised this months ago. It's a standard asset protection strategy. If anything happens, a lawsuit, a liability issue, anything, the structure keeps you safe. It keeps us safe." "From what?" "From risk." "What risk?" "We don't have lawsuits. We don't have liabilities. We have a business we built together, and you just erased me from it." "I didn't erase you. Jesus, Maya. You're still listed as Chief Operating Officer. You still run operations. Nothing about your day-to-day changes. Except I'm not an owner anymore. Except you can make decisions without me. Except if you decide to sell, or shut down, or bring in new investors. I have no say. None." Silence. He picked up the beer again, but didn't drink. His thumb traced the label, peeling it at the corner, a nervous habit I'd seen 1,000 times. "Maya, this is for both of us. I'm protecting what we built." "By taking it from me?" "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" He didn't answer right away. The refrigerator hummed louder, or maybe I just noticed it more in the silence. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping across the kitchen wall. "It's about control," he said finally. "About making sure we can move fast when we need to. About not getting paralyzed by committee decisions." "I'm not a committee. I'm your partner." He flinched. Actually flinched, like I'd struck him. "You were my partner," he said, and then immediately his face changed, realizing what he'd said, trying to take it back. "I mean, you are. You still are. I just meant—" But it was too late. The words were already in the air between us, true and irretrievable. Were past tense. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but I kept my voice level. "How long have you been planning this?" "Maya, how long?" He looked at me then, really looked, the way you look at someone when you're deciding how much truth they can carry. 6 months, he said quietly, so maybe longer. The room tilted. Not literally, but in the way a room tilts when you realize the floor was never as solid as you thought. When you understand that you've been walking on something hollow and the person you trusted most knew it all along. And you never told me. I didn't know how. You didn't know how to tell your wife you were stealing her company? I'm not stealing anything. Jesus Christ, Maya, I'm trying to build something sustainable, something that lasts. And sometimes that means making hard decisions without endless discussions about feelings. Feelings? Daniel, this isn't about feelings. This is about law, about ownership, about the fact that you went behind my back and changed the fundamental structure of our business without my knowledge or consent. Garrett said it was cleaner this way. Cleaner for who? He didn't answer. And in that silence, I understood. This wasn't about protection, it was about control, about ensuring that if the business survived, if it grew, if it became something worth having, it would be his, not ours, his, about making sure that I could be removed, if necessary, that I could be managed, that I was, in the end, expendable. I walked out of the kitchen, up the stairs, into the bedroom we'd shared for 8 years. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, hands in my lap, staring at nothing. Downstairs, I heard the refrigerator open and close, a cabinet, the faint clink of glass on granite, then silence. Then, after a long time, his footsteps on the stairs. They paused outside the bedroom door. I waited for the knock, for him to try the handle, for him to say something that would make this different than what it was. The footsteps moved past, into the guest room. The door closed. The days after the confrontation moved like water through sand, slow, inevitable, eroding. I went to the office, answered emails, attended meetings, smiled at clients. No one knew, or if they did, they didn't say. Maybe Daniel had told them to act normal. Maybe he'd told them I was fine with everything. Maybe he'd told them nothing at all, and everyone just assumed that if I was still showing up, still doing my job, everything must be okay. Daniel and I operated in separate orbits, professional and cold, the way estranged co-parents might navigate a kitchen. We spoke in logistics. The furnace guy is coming Thursday. Did you pay the credit card? I'll be late tomorrow. There's a board meeting next week. At staff meetings, we presented a unified front. We finished each other's sentences the way we always had. We deferred to each other's expertise. To anyone watching, we were still partners, but in the spaces between words, there was nothing. No warmth, no trust. Just the mechanics of a business relationship stripped of everything that had once made it mean something. I stopped sleeping in our bed, moved to the guest room under the pretense of insomnia, of needing to work late, of not wanting to disturb him. Daniel didn't argue, didn't ask me to stay. Maybe he was relieved. Maybe he'd been hoping I would leave on my own so he wouldn't have to be the one who asked. The guest room became my room. I bought new sheets, a reading lamp, a small bookshelf. I created a space that was mine, in a house that no longer felt like ours. I called a lawyer 3 weeks after the confrontation. Not Garrett, obviously, but someone a friend recommended. A woman named Patricia Vance with gray streaks in her hair and a voice that didn't pretend to soften bad news. Her office was in a converted brownstone downtown, up a narrow flight of stairs. The waiting room had that particular silence of a place where people come to manage crises. I sat on a leather chair that squeaked when I moved and filled out intake forms that asked questions I'd never thought I'd have to answer. When Patricia called me in, she sat across from me at a heavy oak desk and listened without interrupting as I explained everything. She took notes in neat handwriting, her face neutral. "Did you sign anything?" she asked when I finished. "No." "Good. That complicates things for him significantly." She flipped through the documents I'd brought, copies of everything from Garrett's email. "If he executed this without your knowledge and you were a 50-50 shareholder, we have options. It won't be clean, but we have options." "What kind of options?" "We could argue that the transfer was fraudulent, that he violated his fiduciary duty to you as a co-owner. We could petition the court to invalidate the trust, restore your shares. It would take time. 6 months, maybe a year. There would be depositions, financial disclosures. It would become public record. And if I don't fight it?" Patricia set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Then you accept the terms of the trust. You remain a beneficiary, which means you might receive distributions if and when the trustee, your husband, decides to make them. But you have no control, no voting rights, no say in how the business is run or sold or dissolved. You become a passenger. I thanked her, said I'd think about it, wrote her a check for the consultation that felt obscene and necessary at the same time. Walking back to my car, I felt hollowed out, not angry, not sad, just empty. I sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the concrete wall in front of me. I didn't want options. I didn't want a legal battle. I wanted the last year to unhappen. I wanted the version of Daniel who had built this with me, who had kissed my shoulder at 2 a.m. after we landed our first major client, who had looked at me like I was the reason any of this was possible. But that version was gone. Maybe he'd never existed. Maybe I just believed in him so hard that I'd imagined him into being. Maybe the man I married and the man who stole my company were always the same person, and I just chose not to see it until I couldn't look away anymore. Some weeks later, I found the first draft. I was clearing out a drawer in the office, my desk, not his, looking for an old client file. Buried beneath old tax documents and employee contracts was a folder I didn't recognize. Manila, unlabeled, bent at the corners. Inside, earlier versions of the shareholder agreement, printed, annotated in Daniel's handwriting. The earliest draft was dated 14 months prior. 14 months, more than a year. He had been planning this since before I noticed the changed passwords, since before the closed-door meetings, since before I started wondering if something was wrong, since before our last anniversary dinner, when he'd held my hand across the table and told me he couldn't imagine doing any of this without me. He'd been lying then, or maybe he hadn't been. Maybe he really couldn't imagine doing it without me, but he could imagine doing it without giving me a choice. I read his notes in the margins, written in blue ballpoint. Needs clean transition, avoid conflict, minimize disruption, as if I were a disruption, as if partnership were something to be minimized. There was another note, circled twice, underlined. Garrett says timing matters. Don't wait too long. On another page, consider estate tax implications. Run numbers with M. M was Marcus. They'd discussed this with Marcus, our minority investor who barely knew my name, who showed up twice a year to sign off on decisions he didn't understand. They'd brought him into the planning before they brought me. I set the folder down carefully, the way you set down something fragile that you know will shatter if you move too quickly. Then I walked out of the office and didn't go back for 3 days. By winter, I had made my decision. I could fight. I could drag this into court, expose what he'd done, reclaim what was taken. Patricia said I had a case, a strong one. He violated every principle of partnership law, she said during our second meeting. A judge would eviscerate him, but winning would mean destroying the company we'd built. It would mean months of depositions and accusations and public filings. It would mean watching our employees, people I'd hired, trained, mentored, get caught in the middle of a war they didn't sign up for. It would mean exposing our clients to uncertainty, our finances to scrutiny. It would mean burning everything down just to prove I had the right to burn it. And I was tired. So tired. So I did something worse, in a way. Something that felt like both surrender and survival. I let go. I negotiated a separation agreement through Patricia, a severance package that valued my contributions without forcing a sale. Enough money to start over, to buy a small condo, to live for a year or two without working while I figured out what came next. Not enough to feel whole. Not enough to compensate for 6 years of building something from nothing, but enough to leave with my dignity, if not my dreams. The negotiations took 2 months. Patricia pushed for more. I told her to accept their offer. Daniel signed quickly, with what I imagined was relief. Probably grateful I wasn't going to fight. Probably telling himself this was generous, that he was being fair, that I was getting more than most people would in my position. On my last day at Strata Solutions, I cleaned out my desk. The employees didn't know it was my last day. I told them I was transitioning to a consulting role, working remotely, which wasn't technically a lie, since that's what the separation agreement called it. A face-saving fiction for everyone involved. Marcus shook my hand and said something vague about new directions and strategic shifts. I nodded, smiled, wondered if he knew what he'd signed, wondered if he cared. I boxed up my things, framed photos, a coffee mug someone had given me as a birthday gift, the small succulent I'd kept alive for 3 years, not much really for 6 years of work. It all fit in 2 boxes. Daniel wasn't there. He had a meeting, supposedly, out of the office all day. I was grateful. I don't know what I would have said if I'd seen him. Maybe nothing. maybe everything. Maybe I would have just looked at him, letting him see what he'd done reflected in my face. I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the sound of tires on wet pavement and my own breathing. It was snowing lightly, the first snow of the season, flakes dissolving on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. The house was empty when I arrived. Our house, though I'd already started thinking of it as his. I made tea, sat at the dining table where we'd first imagined all of this. The wood still had faint wine stains from that night years ago, no matter how many times I'd tried to clean them. I thought about calling him, asking why, demanding an explanation that would make sense of it all, that would let me understand how someone who loved me could do this. But I knew there wasn't one. Or if there was, it wouldn't change anything. Some betrayals don't have reasons, they just have decisions. And Daniel had made his. I moved out in February. The condo I bought was small, 1 bedroom, 8th floor, a view of other buildings, and a thin slice of lake if you pressed your face against the living room window. It didn't smell like rosemary. It didn't have wine stains on the dining table. It didn't have memories embedded in every corner. It was mine, completely, legally, irrevocably mine. I furnished it slowly. A couch from IKEA, a bed I assembled myself, crying over the instructions at midnight because I couldn't figure out which dowel went where. Plates from Target, wine glasses that didn't match. I hung one painting, something abstract I bought from an artist at a street fair. Blue and gray and white, like water, like sky, like nothing specific at all. Some nights I sat on the couch and felt the silence like a weight. No one coming home, no keys in the bowl, no footsteps on the stairs, just me and the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of someone else's television through the walls. Other nights, the silence felt like freedom. Months passed, then a year. I started freelancing, consulting for startups, helping other people build the things I'd lost. I was good at it, better than I expected. Turns out watching something you built get taken from you makes you protective of other people's dreams, makes you careful about contracts and ownership structures and trust. I heard through mutual friends that Strata Solutions was thriving. They'd landed a major contract with the tech company I'd been courting for years, doubled their revenue, hired 20 new people, moved to a bigger office downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows. Daniel had been profiled in a business magazine. Local entrepreneur builds tech success. Someone sent me the link. I don't know if they meant to be cruel or just thought I'd want to know. I read it late at night, the glow of my phone the only light in my bedroom. The article called him a self-made success, talked about his vision, his persistence, his ability to take risks. There was a photo of him in the new office, leaning against a desk, arms crossed, smiling confidently at the camera. There was no mention of me in the article, not once. Not even a footnote about the early days, about who had handled operations while he built the technology. Not a word about the person who'd been there from the beginning. I'd been edited out, quietly, efficiently, as if I'd never been there at all. I read the article 3 times, then closed the tab, sat in the dark for a long time, feeling something strange. Not anger, not even sadness, just recognition. This was how it would be now, his story, his success, his company. And I was the ghost no one mentioned. Years can pass inside a single evening. I think about that Tuesday often. The rosemary chicken growing cold on the counter. The email that arrived at 6:52. The way Daniel looked at me when he said you were my partner, past tense, like it had already been decided long before I knew to fight. I think about the mug that disappeared, the passwords that changed, the calls taken in the driveway in the rain, all those small erasures, rehearsals for the big one. I don't hate him. I tried for a while because hate felt cleaner than grief. But hate takes energy I don't have anymore. What I feel instead is something quieter, a deep, settled knowledge that the person I married and the person who took my company were the same man, and maybe that was always true, and maybe I just loved the version of him I needed to believe in. Some nights, I still dream about the early days. The 2 of us at that dining table, sketching ideas on napkins, laughing at nothing, convinced we were building something that couldn't be taken. In the dream, I try to warn myself. I try to say, count the shares, read the fine print, don't trust him just because you love him. Get your own lawyer, protect yourself. But I never do. And even if I did, I don't think she would listen. Love makes you careless with contracts. Love makes you believe that partnership means something more than paperwork. I know better now. Last month, I saw Daniel at a coffee shop downtown. I'd stopped in after a client meeting, needing caffeine, and a moment to decompress. The shop was crowded, warm with body heat and coffee steam against the February cold outside. I was waiting for my order when I saw him at a corner table. He didn't see me, or pretended not to. He was with someone, a woman I didn't recognize, both of them laughing over open laptops. She was young, mid-20s maybe, dark hair pulled into a bun, professional clothes, expensive bag on the floor beside her chair. Maybe a new hire, maybe a colleague, maybe something else. I watched him for a moment, hidden behind other waiting customers. He looked the same, a little grayer at the temples, laugh lines deeper around his eyes, but fundamentally unchanged, happy even, unburdened by what he'd done, or maybe just better at carrying it. He said something and the woman laughed, tilting her head back, the same way I used to laugh at his jokes, back when I thought we were building something together. I collected my coffee and left before he could turn around. Walking back to my car, I realized something. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want him to fail. I didn't even want the company back. I just wanted him to know that I knew. That every time he signs a document, every time he makes a decision, every time someone calls him a founder, I'm there in the margins, the unacknowledged architect of half of what he has. That the company he claims as his was built by two people and he erased one of them. And he'll carry that, whether he admits it or not. Some thefts are legal. Some betrayals come with notarized signatures and lawyer-approved language. But neither of those things make them right. I haven't remarried, haven't started another company. Maybe I will someday, maybe I won't. What I have now is smaller, simpler, harder to take. A life that fits in one condo, one car, one set of dishes. No shared accounts, no partnerships, no one who can take what's mine by changing a password or signing a document I never saw. It's lonely sometimes. I won't pretend it's not. There are evenings when I sit on my IKEA couch and think about what we were building, about what it might have become if trust had mattered more than control. But it's mine, this small, quiet life, these consulting clients who respect my expertise, this condo with its abstract painting and mismatched wine glasses, this freedom to fail or succeed on my own terms, and that, I've learned, is worth more than I knew. The other night, I was cleaning out my email and found that first message again. Shareholder update, effective immediately. I read it one more time, then archived it. Not deleted, archived, because some things you need to be able to find again, just to remind yourself they were real. There's a strange peace in knowing the worst thing has already happened. You stop waiting for the floor to give way, because it already has, and you survive the fall. You stop checking over your shoulder for the next betrayal, because you've already cataloged all the ways love can be weaponized. You become careful, guarded, maybe too guarded, but alive. I don't think about Daniel much anymore. But when I do, it's not with rage or longing, just a quiet acknowledgement. We built something together, and then he took it, and then I let him, because fighting would have meant staying, and staying would have meant losing myself completely. So I walked away with less than I deserved and more than I expected. My name, my integrity, and the knowledge that I was never the one who broke our partnership. He did. One signature at a time, one password change, one closed-door meeting, one legal document I was never meant to see. Some nights, that's enough. Other nights, I wish I'd fought harder. Wish I'd called Patricia Vance that first week and said, burn it all down, make him pay. But most nights I just sit here in my small condo with my mismatched wine glasses and my abstract painting and my freedom, and I think about the woman I was 6 years ago, the one who believed that love and partnership were the same thing, who thought that building something together meant you both got to keep it. I would tell her to get her own lawyer, to read every document, to never, ever assume that marriage protects partnership or that love protects ownership. But I can't tell her anything. She's gone. She disappeared on a Tuesday evening at 6:52 p.m., reading an email she never should have needed to read. And in her place is someone different. Someone smaller, maybe. Or maybe just more honest about how small we all are when the people we trust decide we're expendable. I sleep better now than I did in that house. Strange, but true. No more lying awake listening for keys in the bowl, for footsteps on the stairs, for the sound of someone coming home who might not be coming home to me anymore. Just silence. Mine. Earned. Kept. And in the morning, I wake up in a place where no one can write me out of my own story. Not anymore.